Hey, welcome. This is a story about two men who become fast friends after a chance meeting. But nothing stays friendly for long when secrets are hiding just beneath the surface. One of them seems like a regular guy with some bad luck. The other? He's got stacks of cash and a taste for chaos. Why did they meet in the first place? And what exactly is being delivered inside those mysterious packages? A night in late 2003, a man named Michael Bridges, 22 years old, took a seat at a professional hockey game in Calgary, Canada. As he looked out at the ice, he couldn't believe his luck. Michael was from Brandon, a city 700 miles away. He'd had a rough year, no job, broke, dumped by his partner, and left behind by most of his friends. Then suddenly, he won a sweepstakes. That's what brought him here, with everything paid for. It felt like a gift from nowhere. He was about to grab a drink when a stranger with a mustache plopped down next to him. The guy smiled and said he'd also won a sweepstakes ticket. Michael lit up. Same story. And just like that, they clicked. They talked easily. Two guys who felt like they'd known each other for years. The game ended, but neither wanted the night to end. The guy, his name was Brock, asked Michael if he wanted to hit a nearby strip club. Michael was all in. At the club, Michael noticed something strange. Brock didn't look rich. He dressed simply, but he was spending money like crazy. Huge tips, round after round of drinks, and a fistful of bills he threw at the dancers. Michael, struggling financially, wasn't about to complain. As they stood at the bar later that night, Michael thanked Brock. He didn't want to leave Calgary and go back to his empty life in Brandon. When he said that, Brock froze. "Brandon?" Brock asked. "That's where I'm moving." Now, everything changed. This didn't have to be a one-time thing. They could be real friends. Brock offered a deal, help him find a place in Brandon, and he'd help Michael find some work. Michael stared at the thick roll of bills in Brock's hand and agreed. Deal. A few months passed, and by early December 2003, Michael was sitting in the passenger seat of Brock's car as they drove through Brandon. They'd just finished lunch, and Brock was driving Michael home. Mid-drive, Brock's phone rang. As he answered, Michael instantly recognized his tone. It was Brock's boss on the line. Since that night in Calgary, their friendship had grown. Brock had moved to Brandon, Michael had helped him find an apartment, and in return, Brock gave him work. But the work was odd. Brock had Michael delivering small, sealed packages around town. He always warned him, don't ever open them. At first, Michael was suspicious. Something about the deliveries didn't feel right. Maybe even illegal. But then he thought back to that night at the club, Brock tossing around cash like it was nothing. That kind of money could change Michael's life. So he agreed to deliver one. Nothing bad happened. Then he delivered more. Michael never looked inside the packages. He didn't ask questions. It became just another part of being friends and working with Brock. And Michael needed the money too badly to stop. Back in the car, Brock ended his call with a flat, "Okay, I'll take care of it now." He hung up and, without saying a word, spun the car around and began speeding in the opposite direction. Within minutes, he pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel called the City Hotel. Before Michael could ask what was happening, Brock turned and said, "You stay here." Then he got out and walked toward a room, knocking loudly. Michael watched from the car. A woman answered the door. She looked shocked to see Brock. She tried to close the door, but he shoved it open. The two started shouting. Michael couldn't hear the words, but the tension was obvious. He looked around, hoping no one else was seeing this. They could get in trouble. He turned back toward the scene and saw Brock punch the woman hard in the face. She dropped instantly. Michael froze. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Brock climbed on top of her and hit her again and again. Blood smeared across her face. Then Brock calmly stood, shut the motel door behind him, returned to the car, and drove off, like nothing had happened. Michael sat in silence the entire ride. Until now, he'd assumed that Brock's shady work couldn't be that serious. Sure, it was suspicious, but violent? That was a line Michael didn't think had been crossed. until now. When Brock pulled up in front of Michael's house, he finally spoke. "Don't tell anyone what you saw." Michael nodded. "I won't." Then he got out and went inside. About a week after that night at the motel, Michael was at home when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Brock. His first instinct was to ignore it. After what he'd witnessed, the last thing he wanted was more involvement. But he knew he had no choice. He hadn't told anyone about what he saw, but not out of loyalty, more out of fear. After seeing what Brock was capable of, Michael felt like there was no safe way out. He was in too deep. He answered the call. Brock didn't waste time with greetings. He simply said he had another package for Michael to deliver, if he was still in. Michael hesitated. He knew the right thing would be to walk away. But the image of Brock attacking that woman flashed in his mind. What would happen if he said no? And then there was the money. Michael still needed it. After a long pause, he said yes. Brock said he was glad to hear it, and added that both he and the boss were impressed with Michael's silence. Then he hung up. The compliment meant nothing. Michael still felt trapped, but he grabbed his keys and headed out. 2 months passed. It was now early February 2004. Michael and Brock were sitting in a diner in Brandon, sharing a meal. It had become routine, delivering packages, meeting regularly, Brock always paying. But today, something was off. Michael watched Brock fidget, tap his fingers, glance around. He looked on edge. Michael finally asked, "Are you okay?" Brock snapped to attention. "Actually," he said, "things are better than okay. I have an opportunity for you." He said both he and the boss were impressed. Michael hadn't opened the packages, hadn't said a word about the motel. That loyalty, Brock said, made Michael a candidate for more. He wanted Michael to meet the boss. If the meeting went well, Brock said, Michael could take on a higher role in the organization. More responsibility, more money, less dirty work. Michael felt a swirl of emotions, excitement, nerves, a faint pulse of dread. He wanted the money. He needed the stability. After months working with Brock, danger and secrecy no longer felt like deal breakers. But meeting the boss, that was another level. This wasn't some faceless figure. This was someone powerful, someone dangerous. Michael said nothing, still processing. Then Brock added one more thing. Before he could take Michael to meet the boss, Michael had to pass one final test. He had to show he could be as brutal and unflinching as Brock. No more deliveries, no more small stuff. Michael was stunned. He didn't know what was expected of him. Was he supposed to come up with something? Wait for an assignment? But before he could speak, something clicked. He realized he already had something. A piece of his past, something horrible he had endured and survived. Michael believed that if he told this story, it would prove he had what it took. So, he looked Brock in the eye, and he told him everything. As Michael finished his story, Brock sat silently for a moment, eyes wide. Then he nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, you're ready to meet the boss." A few days later, the meeting was set. Michael arrived at a fancy hotel in a nearby city. The lobby was sleek, quiet, high-end. He spotted Brock already waiting. Brock stood up, smiled, and motioned for Michael to follow him. They rode the elevator up in silence, exited on a high floor, and stopped in front of a door to a lavish suite. Brock pulled out a key, unlocked the door, and the two men stepped into a room that looked like a movie set. Plush furniture, massive windows, expensive everything. Michael looked around. The suite was empty. He turned to Brock and asked, "Where's the boss?" Brock replied, "The boss doesn't wait for anyone. People wait for the boss. Just sit down. He'll be here soon." Michael nodded and took a seat, but his stomach was in knots. This was the most important moment of his life, either a new beginning or the end of the road. Brock noticed Michael's nerves. "Hey," he said, "why don't you run through your story one more time, like a practice round, before the boss gets here?" Michael agreed. Anything was better than sitting in silence. He told his story again, word for word, just as he had a few nights earlier. As he finished, there was a knock at the door. Brock looked at him. "That's him. You ready?" Michael nodded, heart pounding. Brock walked to the door, glanced at Michael one last time and opened it. And the moment Michael saw who was standing outside, he realized everything. The sweepstakes, the hockey game, the jobs, the woman at the motel, even the packages. They'd all been part of a setup. The sweepstakes hadn't been real. The packages he'd been delivering? Just flour. Nothing illegal. Brock's generous cash? A prop. The woman at the motel? An actress. The beating? Faked. The blood? A capsule in her mouth. But there was one thing that had been real. The organization Brock worked for. Only it wasn't a criminal syndicate. It was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Brock was an undercover officer. Every conversation, every move, every meeting. It was all part of an elaborate sting operation designed to get Michael to confess. And he did. The story he'd told? It wasn't fiction. 2 years earlier, Michael's girlfriend, Erin Cheney, had tried to break up with him. Enraged, he had attacked her, strangled her unconscious, then drowned her in the bathtub. He'd left her body in a remote dump site. That was the story he shared. That was his proof that he was ruthless enough to work for the boss. Instead, it became his confession, recorded on hidden cameras placed around the suite. When the door opened, the boss was nowhere to be seen. Instead, it was the RCMP. They arrested Michael on the spot. Later, Erin's body was recovered and given a proper burial. Michael was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. So let's talk about this. What do you think pushed Michael to reveal the darkest part of himself? Was it greed, desperation, or was it pride in what he thought made him strong? The moral of this story is clear. You can't outrun your past. Lies catch up, secrets spill, and justice, eventually, shows up at the door. If this story stunned you like it stunned me, hit that like button. Subscribe to my channel so you never miss another twisted true story. And share this with someone who thinks they've seen it all. Stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, people aren't always who they say they are.